Roundtable here at MindPoint Group. Today I'm joined by a bunch of veterans from the MPG offices here. Why don't you gentlemen introduce yourselves?
Well, hi, I'm Andy Seeley. I'm the Director of Architecture and Engineering here at MindPoint Group. I'm an Air Force veteran. I was enlisted, served from 1992 to 2000, and I was a communications and computer systems operator.
Hey, I'm Matt Latyszonek. I'm currently a program manager here at MPG. I support some of our federal clients. I'm a Navy veteran. I was an intelligence officer, spent about 5 years active duty and a little bit of time in the reserves after that. I also spent some time overseas, deployed in Iraq as a Riverine, and just really happy to be here and excited to bring my veteran experience to MPG.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Locke. I am the program manager for the what we call here at MPG the JSOC contract, which is the Justice Security Operations Center, rather than, since this is a military-themed roundtable, not Joint Special Operations Command. I was in the Navy for 26 years, started off enlisted as an Arabic linguist, then got commissioned as a strategic and information warfare officer. Kind of like Matt, spent a lot of time in the Middle East doing counterterrorism work, and happy to be here.
Awesome, guys. Thanks for joining. I'm Casey Barnett. I'm here with the marketing team at MindPoint Group, and we're bringing the team together today to talk a little bit before we get into Veterans Day, which is coming up quick for everybody here in November. We wanted to talk a little bit about your roles in the military and how they influenced you getting into, well, cybersecurity and then also into MPG. And was hoping to just get some insights from you on how did military service prepare you for your work here at MPG. Andy, let me throw that over to you.
All right. Well, first I'll talk a little bit about my family's military tradition. I had a distant ancestor that was in the Union Army in the Civil War. My father was briefly in the Army for 2 weeks during Vietnam and was mustered out for medical. And then me. So there's no real meaningful military service tradition in my family. So I was really the first and kind of a bit of a trailblazer, I guess, for the family. And the thing that I learned from my service, I was stationed in Korea, I was stationed in Mississippi, I was stationed in Germany during my 2 enlistments. The thing that really was indelible for me was the sense of service. Service itself as a thing, not that you do when you're on the clock, but a thing that really guides you as a principle. And so ever since then, while I was in uniform, I really got deeply into that kind of thinking. And then afterwards, for the last 22 years since I've been out of uniform, everything I've done has been an act of service in some form or fashion, be it to the United States government or to more local activities or to charity groups or things like that. Service doesn't end for a lot of people when they take off their uniform. Working for the customers like we have at MindPoint Group, like Department of Justice, is an act of service. In my off time, I'm a Red Cross volunteer in the Service to Armed Forces group there. I'm a life member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars post in Tampa. And that's really the lesson. And taking that forward into a career that leads me to MindPoint Group, bringing service to everything you do sets you apart from people that show up to do a job and go home.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy.
So I kind of want to echo, starting off, what Andy said there. I think that obviously that sense of service that most of us, pretty much all of us who have served have, it wasn't to collect a paycheck, right? I mean, at least not for me. I never signed up and joined the Navy because I was looking to get rich. Anybody who served is going to laugh at that because nobody gets rich joining the military. But that's not why you do it. And I think that for me, it was my first job out of college. So my first real career was, the concept. There were days, weeks when I forgot I was getting paid to do this. The bank, it shows up in your bank account. Like, oh, that's right. I get paid to do this. I get paid to serve my country, to work with these great folks, to lead, mentor, and to be led, and to learn things. So I think that's, I just want to dovetail into what Andy said there, because I think that's incredibly important and it sets the tone. And I think you find that in a lot of veterans and non-veterans as well, of course. But I think it's something that really you find very much so in the veteran community. I think on the more sort of practical side, to shift gears a little bit, some of the things that I learned and that I've brought over that have made me successful in my career, not just in MPG, but really anywhere I've worked, is your communication. Communication is something that anywhere you work, any industry is paramount. And what you learn in the military is to always have a plan for that. You've got your, what we used to call PACE plan, your primary, your alternate, contingency, emergency. And we don't, in the private sector, we tend not to use those terms because, we need to leave those acronyms behind because there's too many acronyms. But it helps you understand and realize you always need to have a plan A, a plan B. And beyond that, to communicate early and often with your clients, especially. At MPG, we have a lot of very demanding clients doing very important, very serious work. And, we need to be constantly communicating with them, very transparent. And I think that's how we can be successful. And that's something in the military you learn because, that constant communication can sometimes, not trying to dramatize too much, but can be the difference between life and death or mission success or failure. So I think that's something, I really took away from my time there and have, drawn out across my entire career for the most part. I've got more, but I'll stop and I'll give Kevin a chance to chime in here too. Andy and I could probably talk for hours.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think Andy and Matt hit the service aspect of this sufficiently. So I'll talk just a little bit about, I would say, working in a dynamic work environment, right? And so those in uniform, we had, you've got doctrine in place, you've got policies in place, you've got regulations, and, to some extent, there's SOPs that may or may not be up to date, et cetera. But there's still an awful lot of evaluating what the requirements are, what the lay of the land, the terrain looks like, and figuring out how to problem solve a lot of times in real time with changing conditions. And that's a skill set that is applicable to lots of different employment areas. And I think cybersecurity and just cyber operations in general, definitely. So back to you, Casey.
Awesome. So based on, the range of military service you guys have is amazing. And we were talking about before we started off, like the number of years in service, but also since service in a lot of cases. But as you've worked through your careers after serving in the military or right after now for a few of you, what is it that other veterans should know about if they want to start a career in, say, cybersecurity? What can set them up? What are some ways to possibly stand out in the field?
Go ahead, Andy. I see you leaning.
I was leaning in. I certainly was. I was leaning in. I'm going to let Matt and Kevin probably talk about education and experience directly. I've got a thing that I want to bring up that I think is really important for current active duty folks who want to get a career, start a career in their civilian life in cybersecurity, but are not currently doing cybersecurity work. They're not in an MOS or an AFSC or a role that's cybersecurity in nature. I encounter veterans or folks nearing the end of their terms kind of regularly these days, where their current job is something else: infantry, logistics, loading bombs, other things, and they use the education benefits of the military to get a degree in cybersecurity or computer science, and then they approach the end of their time and start looking for jobs. I've got one Marine veteran in particular that I'll use as an example. 10 years of experience in infantry, recent bachelor's degree in cybersecurity, and nobody will hire the guy. And he ended up kind of coming into my orbit, and I was kind of giving him some advice and counseling all along the way. The military does a thing, they used to call it Transition Assistance Program. I assume they still do, the TAP, where they would teach you to write a resume. And a lot of times, especially for young enlisted folks, they want you to highlight all your responsibility and leadership. My TAP resume included me being responsible for billions of dollars worth of highly sensitive electronic equipment for the United States Air Force, which meant that I loaded and threw sandbags around a U-2 plane in Korea during the monsoons. Had absolutely no bearing on my actual ability to do things. But that's what they teach you to do to demonstrate your value in civilian terms. Well, what happens that I see happening that I try to counsel people about, if you've got 10 years of experience as an infantry platoon leader in the Marine Corps and a 0 years of experience with your cybersecurity degree, you're kind of a terrifying candidate to a hiring manager, Because if you're applying for an entry-level job and you highlight all your leadership abilities, well, the hiring manager may say you're riskier of a hire than somebody with zero leadership abilities, because you're going to come after my job, or you're not going to do the things I ask you to do. You're going to think you know better, or you're going to try to tell other people what to do. It may seem that way. So what I advise people to do is highlight your military experience, not in terms of your ability to go charge the hill, but rather in terms of your ability to be a good follower. Because that was a thing early in professional military education for me in the Air Force, was good leadership requires good followership, was kind of a saying that they used to say back then, that if you are going to be a leader, you need to know how to follow. Highlight that kind of skill, that kind of experience, and then say, I'm looking for an entry-level job. I'm not looking for a mid-level or a senior level job. And I bring this ability to the table to make you, the hiring manager, and you, the company, better without overreaching. That kind of calibration of people's first approach to the civilian world, I think, is really important when they're presenting themselves and their real value to a hiring manager.
So I can even follow on to Andy there. I think that, I agree with everything he's saying there for the most part. And also, I think that to tell our veterans, don't be afraid to maybe have to take a step backwards. The vast majority of what you're going to do, like Andy said, being an infantry soldier and officer, being a pilot, a lot of that, the technical skills are not going to directly translate over to being a SOC analyst, right? But, I think a couple of things you can highlight are that your ability to learn on the job. I mean, any of us here who have served know that probably most of what we learned, we didn't learn in the classroom. Yeah, we had our 6 months of initial training to, learn the textbook way to do things, but almost everything we learned to do, practically and operationally, was done on the job from somebody who already did it, smarter than we were and more experienced. So I think highlighting those things, talking about your ability to learn quickly, to what Kevin said earlier about being able to adapt and, think on the fly, highlight those skill sets, because, if you happen to be maybe be a cryptologist in the military, maybe that's going to have a nice direct translation, but that's probably 2% of the population, right? And even Kevin has one saying, nope, probably not even that. So highlight those sort of softer skills, the ability to learn fast, the ability to learn on the job, and be humble. Don't be afraid to say, you know what, I was getting out of the military as a an 04 or as an E8. You're not probably going to come to a new career field and be hired on as a senior person. Now, maybe if you're going to a leadership role, maybe you will be, but even then, probably not. So, don't be afraid to take a step backwards and realize that could then still springboard you even higher than you were before. So, I think that putting all those things together is really the key to success. And I struggled a lot when I got out of the Navy. And so I was an intelligence officer. So I came to DC. A lot of that could very directly translate to the jobs I was looking at. But even then, depending on the agency or the company you're going to work for, the phrasing was different. The wording was different. So you thought you were a great candidate. Well, one agency in Langley may read something different than an agency does in Fort Meade, and they're going, we don't know what that means. So, the language is tricky. So really highlight what it means at the end of the day, not just what the words say. What can you actually do? What are you willing to do? And highlight you as a person and the value you bring. All those skill sets we talked about before. The sense of service. About being more than a paycheck.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Matt and Andy said, especially Matt, you invoking the word humility. I think that's an important one to keep in mind. But I'm also going to take an opposite approach to what they're saying, even though I agree with all of that. I would also say, trust yourself, and you know more than you think you do, and you've got more skills than you think you do, right? 26 years in and looking at the prospect of going out to the real world was pretty daunting, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to have what it takes out there? And there's a lot of things that are transferable. We call them soft skills, just, work ethic, things like that. And the ability to figure out how to solve a problem, even if you don't know the specific answer to this specific problem. Just trust yourself. And I would say, as far as what Matt was talking about with resume language, write down everything you've done, right? I mean, be as expansive as you can. And when you go through to start applying for positions, try and tailor and pull from that long list of actions and accomplishments and whatnot, so that you can tailor it to the specific position. Because I think Andy's completely right that if you're looking for an entry level and you're walking in talking about how you were a mid-level manager, well, that might not necessarily be applicable. and different employers are going to want different things. And so the more, just like anything, you prepare as much as you can in the beginning, right? And so if you can be as comprehensive in gathering that kind of information and preparing it for being components of your resume, I think you'll be in a good spot.
Casey, I'd like to tie back in a little bit to something that we didn't touch on, but I think is really important for younger enlisted folks. Tuition assistance, GI Bill, the ability to get certifications, like mainstream commercial certifications while you're in uniform, and to complete a degree while you're in uniform. Do it then. I took classes every station I was at from every school that I had. When I applied to graduate school later on, I had to go to 9 different schools to get transcripts. I kind of envy kids that just go to one school and spend 4 years and go to frat parties, right? I patchwork quilted it together and made it work, but I did it while I was in uniform, and I did it while I wasn't paying for it out of my salary. The Air Force was paying for it. And also there's a new program called Skills Bridge that any enlisted troop, or for that matter officer that's looking to get out, they can plan ahead and get an internship with a Skills Bridge supporting a company that's going to be a direct transition point into their next career. And then one other thought that Matt, that you kind of reminded me of, for more senior people who are getting out at the end of a longer career like Kevin's, it's really important to treat people like you'd like to be treated, especially younger folks. And here's why. When I was a contractor, I was the chief engineer at U.S. Central Command, and I hired a guy as a project manager for one of my teams. He didn't remember me, but I remembered him when I was a staff sergeant, and he was a lieutenant colonel, and he was an absolute jerk to me. That was 15 years before, and I hired him. I hired him anyway, but I remembered it. Treat people like you'd like to be treated, because you never know what knuckle dragon staff sergeant is going to be hiring you at the end of your career.
So I actually want to quickly tag on to something there. Andy made me think of this. One of the other things I think I really took away from my time in, I went straight out of college. So I was, 22, 23, young junior officer, no clue what I was doing. Suddenly you're in charge, right? Which is just the way the military operates. And I end up at a unit where I've got 20 folks working for me, some of which have 15, 16, 17 years experience. I've got senior chiefs and master chiefs who've been doing this their entire lives. And now suddenly I'm supposed to lead them and manage them. And so you learn very quickly, to what Andy's saying too, how to treat folks, but also, to be humble and to rely on those senior folks, to not come in thinking you know everything. That's a lesson I really took away as a JO, because I didn't know anything. And so I leaned on my chiefs and senior chiefs and let them, help set our team up for success. And I would, do what I could do to help make that happen, man, train, equip, all that kind of stuff. But that was a huge lesson I learned, because I had one, very salty old senior chief who, had been around forever. And he knew what he was doing, and he didn't really, he was a little rougher on the edges, but you find a way to make it work with them. And that's the other piece. You learn, to Kevin's point earlier about diverse, working with a diverse group of folks. You have to make it work in the military. Nobody's really getting fired. I mean, it can happen, but very rare. Your team is your team. You have to accomplish the mission and work through those differences and work through those challenges of personalities or backgrounds or opinions, and still, get from A to B successfully. In the private sector, if you can make it work like that, that's great. But there's sometimes that people come and go voluntarily even. So, it's another piece you really have to learn to adapt, and you can carry that over to, your post-military life, and it will make you, I think, even more successful.
Awesome. Well, we're getting close on time, but I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to just, if there's anything else that you wanted to pass along as advice, or maybe some experiences that you've had working at MindPoint Group and connecting to the veterans and the community that's at MindPoint Group, or within even the cybersecurity groups that you're in, or, like Kevin, you're over at JSOC and connecting with the other departments and other agencies you're working with.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, if I may, real quick, I would say do something that I unfortunately did not do over the course of my career, and that is develop a community of, you can call them mentors, you can call them trusted advisors, whatever you want to call them, right? But and don't have it just be one or two people, and try and be, have some variety across who you ask to fill that role for you, and build that, the trust-based relationship where you can come to them with some candid questions, comments, concerns, etc., so that you have a sounding board from somebody who has been there, quote unquote, right? I mean, we're not all going to have all the answers, but to build that network, that support network, I think is important as well. Back over to you, Matt.
Yeah. Yes, the last thing I just wanted to add, Kevin actually stole one of my 2 points there. I was going to say, if you can find mentors, that's huge, especially before you get out, to have that group of experts you can rely on and talk to, and that sounding board, to use Kevin's terms. That's huge. And even after you get out, if you can quickly identify in your post-military career some of those folks who maybe are where you want to be. I want to be there in 5 to 10 years. Get to know them, talk to them. I mean, that's maybe they're several levels above you, but I've never encountered anybody, especially at MindPoint Group. I mean, everyone's door or laptop, so to speak, is wide open. But even in my whole career, I've been able to go to folks several levels above me and say, hey, I'm Matt. I'm this junior guy. I'm curious what you do. I'm interested in that kind of work. Can we talk about it? And that set me up for, working my way up the PM track years ago. So I totally agree with Kevin on the mentorship part. And I completely forgot what my second point was now, because that's where it was. So I'll kick it over to if Andy's got anything else to add, and then I'll, if I remember, maybe.
Well, there's a good point that you make there, that in the service and also in the government service, in the civil service, it's very clear what ranks are, what pay bands are, and how you move up those ranks. If you're an E4 or an O4, you know how to get to E5 or O5. You know what those rules are. And in the civilian world that we're in, it's not so clear. MindPoint Group does a pretty good job of establishing what those different pay bands and requirements are. But in general, you might be a 50-year-old veteran who just took your uniform off and get hired by a 22-year-old kid right out of college who happens to have the MBA and be running the company. That's a little bit disconcerting for a lot of folks, I think. So that's something that's really needs some patience to be able to and mentoring, as Kevin says, to navigate. But my last word on it for MindPoint Group, we're doing a fair piece of this, as evidenced by this group here. But for anybody, it's Veterans Day. For your next hire you make for your company, hire a vet.
And I remembered what I was going to say. Thank you, Andy. MPG has a great group of veterans across the company. And so if you're new, you're just out of the military, you come to a company like MPG, you've got an instant, family, so to speak, of folks who can relate to everything you've been through, everything you're going through, the transition to, the civilian world, and transition to the cybersecurity world even. So, and you've got that instant place where you've got same, you can talk to them, speak the same language, just like the three of us were doing before we started this call, right? Just swapping, what we'll call C stories. Sorry, Andy.
I was Air Force.
Sky stories. I don't know what you guys call them. But yeah, you've got this instant camaraderie, and I think that's something I've really appreciated, and it's been great for me. And I think I have guys on my team who are vets too, and we talk all the time about the good old days. So it's fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us, Matt, Kevin, Andy. Thanks for being here today and talking a little bit about your service. And thank you again for all your information.